Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Caitlin Allen, and I am an editor for Horage's Dairyman magazine. Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar, which is titled A Feed and Forage Outlook for the Year Ahead. This growing season has provided the United States with some extreme weather conditions, from drought to excessive moisture. This weather impacted forage quality and quantity, and this webinar will include some lab results evaluating this feed. Our speakers will also discuss yield, costs, and possible ration adjustments. A big thank you goes to Kuhn, our sponsor for today's webinar. Their support of this production is greatly appreciated. Just a reminder that if you are listening to this webinar live today, you have access to a PDF of the slides that can be printed or downloaded to your computer. That handout is found in the Handouts section of the GoToWebinar control panel drop-down there. Also, if you have any questions for our speakers throughout the course of their presentations, you can type those into the questions section of the control panel, and we will get to those following our two presentations today. We are very lucky to have an experienced pair of speakers for our discussion this afternoon. And first up will be Mike Rankin, managing editor of Hay and Forage Grower magazine. Mike earned his master's degree from Iowa State University. He then worked on a dairy farm for several years before joining the University of Wisconsin Extension as a crops and soils agent in Fond du Lac County. After serving the agricultural community there for 27 years, he joined our team to become the managing editor of Hay and Forage Grower magazine, which is produced in our office here in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. Our second speaker is Mike Hutjens, a familiar voice to our webinar listeners. Originally from Wisconsin, Mike graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison before working for University of Minnesota Extension. From there, he headed slightly south and has been working at the University of Illinois since 1979. As a dairy cattle nutrition specialist, he has shared presentations and information with people around the world. Mike, welcome to the webinar. We look forward to hearing your presentations, and I will turn it over to Mike Rankin to start us off.
Okay, thanks, Caitlin. I'm going to start off talking a little bit about the kind of the state of forages here in 2023 as we sit here in the middle of November. And I always begin with kind of a disclaimer in that, you know, forage markets and production are really regional, and you can look at any region and different types of forages are grown, which are going to affect supply and prices. It's used for different purposes, and that will affect prices as well. And each region has its own supply and demand dynamics. So even though we're talking about, you know, forages on a national perspective, for the most part, not everything may apply to your area. So a little bit different narrative in 2023. I felt like the last couple years we were just repeating the same old, but definitely a whole different ball game here this past year. In terms of what's been down, it's certainly been milk prices, hay prices, some input prices, and exports pretty much across the board. Beef markets have remained strong, primarily due to supply constraints that have been perpetuated by droughts for the past several years in some of our big beef producing areas. But on the plus side, water in the West was pretty plentiful, and I say plentiful in terms of relating to past years where they've had some significant water issues, but above average snowfall in the mountains, and actually some record snowfall in the mountains, as well as just rain falling, kept the irrigation pumps running this past summer. That wasn't so much the case here in the Midwest where we are, where it was quite a bit drier than normal, almost, and as you'll see later, a drought situation in a lot of the Midwest. So let's take a look at what temperatures and precipitation looked like here quickly. This was looking at temperatures. You'll notice that really the only extreme heat occurred in the deep south. Other parts of the U.S. were maybe even a little above average to cooler than average. Looking at precipitation, that too this is a map that looks quite a bit different than what we've seen in the past several years, where we have a lot of moisture out in the western part of the U.S. And up in New England. And then in the Midwest, we're looking at pretty dry conditions through that major part of the growing season. So a lot different from a growing season perspective during this past year. And I always like to look at when did the corn get planted, because planting early doesn't guarantee a good growing season, but planting late almost guarantees where we're going to have some yield shortage. And this year, as you'll see, by the middle of May, we were at 65% planted. Compared to last year, we were only 45% planted. So it was a good spring to get crops in the ground early. And then if they made it through the dry weather, they were off and running. So look at the drought monitor, and this is right at the beginning of August. I always take a look at this part of the growing season because this is kind of the crucial time for corn pollination and that sort of thing. And boy, what a difference from the 22 map to the 23 map, where we see what would be typical of really dry weather out west and in the south in 22. And then it just seems like the drought moved east to the Midwest, where almost every Midwest state experienced some level of drought at some point in the growing season. And if we look at root zone moisture, again, right at the beginning of August into July, you can see this showing up in the Midwest pretty easily. Out here in these irrigated areas, we always expect to see some drier conditions, but we don't expect to see wetter conditions out here in the Central Valley and in California like we did this year. So this is occurring because we're seeing a shift in weather patterns, and we kind of said goodbye to La Nina, which has dominated our weather patterns these past past few years at least, and said hello to El Nino. And what we see here between these two is that these jet streams, the polar jet stream anyway, tends to move from south up north, whereas the Pacific jet stream moves farther south. And what that means is that we see a weather pattern like this in an El Nino, where we have warmer than normal in the north and drier than normal, but yet cooler and wetter in the south and wetter than normal in the southwest. So I would expect, until El Nino decides to say goodbye, that that's what's going to drive our weather patterns in the near future. Well, let's shift away from weather a little bit and take a look at the current hay situation. This past May, hay stocks dropped another 13%. You can see that May 1 hay stocks are almost at record low levels. They were a little bit lower back in 2013. And the USDA October crop production report just this last month forecasted alfalfa hay production was going to be up 1% from last year, grass up not quite 1%. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. The final numbers really won't be tallied, or we won't know them until January. But, you know, we've had 3 years in a row where hay stocks have declined. We look at the average September hay price as reported by USDA. A year ago at this time, we were at a record level, $277 a ton. This year it sits at $224. And this is going to be a trend you're going to see here for the next few slides. But comparing 2022 to 2023, you'll notice in 2022, the orange bars, we just kept going up. And really for the past couple of years, you know, we haven't seen that cyclic nature of hay prices where they tend to go up starting toward the end of the year and through winter, and then peak somewhere in spring around April or May, and then come down during the growing season. And that was always the way things were. But these last couple of years, we kind of broke that cycle. But looking at 2023, we peaked out in April, and then it's just been a downhill slide since then. September coming in again at 224. This is average for all quality of hay. And if we just look at the supreme and premium quality alfalfa hay, so these would be the numbers that USDA uses for their dairy margin coverage program. Those two have come down since a year ago. It's been a steady decline. Most recently, the number was at $288 per ton. And this is the number that's determined from the just the top 5 dairy states. If we just look out west, and this is data from the Hoyt report that focuses on the Western hay markets, I wanted to point out that if we look at the current prices, these are delivered prices to the Central Valley of California, these first two, and then look a year ago, those prices are down at least $100 per ton out there. And the same would be true in Idaho and Washington and Oregon, where they've seen a pretty significant decline in hay prices. And you might say, well, you know, why so much? Well, at least a part of that reason has been hay exports. Through September, alfalfa hay exports were down 29% from a year ago. China, which is our largest hay alfalfa hay importer, they're off by 54% from a year ago, and that's depicted in this graph over here. And you can see January through September in 2022 compared to what we're looking at in 2023. Now, offsetting that a little bit is that both Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been up significantly this year. But this export picture has a huge effect on Western hay markets. So where are hay prices going to go in 2024? I don't know. It's going to depend a lot on several factors. Is the West going to have another wet or at least average winter for precipitation? Are these hay stocks going to rebound somewhat from higher 2023 production? We still have some trucking problems, and that affects hay movement and prices in some areas. Other feed commodities are down, as are some inputs, and typically hay follows competitive feed prices. So we always look at those to see, get a glimpse of, where things might be going. What are milk and beef prices going to do? Well, beef is in short supply, so those prices are up. Whether consumers will continue to pay higher prices remains to be seen. Milk, probably somewhere between 2022 and 2023. I think class 3 is predicted under $20 through most of the 2024, at least at this point in time. Interest rates remain a drag, and we don't know where those will go, hopefully down, but those add to our cost of production, certainly. Are the exports going to rebound? We don't. We expect them to, maybe not to the extent they were last year, but at least a little bit higher. And then the big factor always is what's the weather going to do in 2024. So I would expect we'll see some movement in hay prices, but to what extent still remains to be seen. Just throwing this graph up here, these are retail fertilizer prices, recent ones, from the last 4 years. And you can see that the purple bars, 2023, most fertilizer prices down significantly from the last couple of years, maybe not to the point that they were back in 2020, but this will offer some relief in terms of cost of production. Our forage seed supplies look pretty good for the most part. The only thing I would point out is that if you're growing some of the sorghum species, either forage sorghum, sorghum Sudan grass, some of those seed supplies are tight. So you may want to at least inquire about what the availability will be for whoever you purchase your seed from. Everything else that's commonly used looks to be in pretty good shape. So to wrap up, kind of the big picture, I expect hay prices will start to stabilize here at some point, maybe seasonally rise through the winter as we'd see normally occurring, and then as we get into the production season next year, come down a bit. Although drought may have stifled yields in some areas, I think forage quality should be above average. Drought's a bummer on yields, but it usually opens up big windows to make hay without any rain delays or getting hay rained on, and hence timeliness shouldn't have been a big issue, especially early in this past growing season. Regions that are in a second consecutive year of drought are going to be short on forage. And, it's been my experience over the years that first year drought, most producers are able to navigate. It's that second year that really makes it tough. So areas like Missouri, they may be a little short this year, having come through 2 years of pretty significant drought. Despite the drought, a lot of producers, at least that I've talked to in the Midwest, still reported good or excellent yields and quality of corn silage and alfalfa, and they were more or less surprised. The annual forages varied a little bit, especially if you're trying to get them planted during that exceptional dry period. I think maybe in some cases corn plants could have been a little shorter, but most of them still develop ears, and so what effect that has on forage quality remains to be seen. Modern corn hybrids today, they're just a lot better at handling stress and drought than they were 20 years ago, and it's really a situation where these breeders have made just great strides with modern corn hybrids. The West is still going to require more years of moisture. They, 1 year isn't going to do it for them out there. And we already talked about hay exports trending down, and the forecast is for more hay in 23 compared to last year. And also keep an eye on December 1 hay stocks report, which will be coming out here in another month or so. The U.S. dairy herd shrinking at the moment, while the beef herd is slowly growing. It would grow a lot quicker given the price situation, but there was a lot of culling of the beef herd and replacements during this past few years. So risk management now involves both price as well as inventory, feed protection. I think we see enough droughts year after year, and we don't know where they're going to be, but it's really important to have some extra inventory on hand, at least to get you through that first year, because forage inventory is like gold. So with that, I think that's my last slide. I will turn it back over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. We touched on a lot of different topics there, and hopefully that will spur some questions from our audience. As a reminder, everyone can drop their questions in the GoToWebinar control panel over on your side there. And Dr. Hutjens has his slides up on the screen, so I will toss it back to him.
Well, very good, Caitlin, and we can go ahead and move forward. And thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to share this program with Mike as well. So let's move forward and talk a little bit about forage quality and some of the strategies that we as dairy farmers, nutritionists, consultants need to be aware of as we go into the 24 feeding year. So let's look ahead. We all know that grain prices have dropped. We'll show you a comparison on that. It's dropped significantly at this point, and I anticipate it might drop a little bit more for a couple of reasons. Soybeans, you can see price there. Again, we'll look over time where that how that has changed there. Soybean meal is cheaper, much like Mike's comment on forages, $3.80 a ton, and that may even go lower because of biodiesel. More about that in a bit later. Mike already gave you a good idea on the value of hay. High quality hay is still up on that $230, $224 ton range, and the byproduct feeds in Illinois. And I stress that because certainly in Illinois we look at such things as corn gluten and the distillers grains, wheat midds, questionable right now. But some of you in California, you have almond hulls. Some of you in Florida have citrus pulp. Some of you folks in Michigan, Minnesota have beet pulp. So every region is slightly different. So what are the wild cards? Much like Mike's presentation, I'll talk about inflation. Inflation, what's interesting is a recent release was that consumers are spending more money on dairy products, but they're getting less for their dollar. And that's getting to be a little more of a challenge with. So inflation is not helping us on the demand side. Exports on dairy is down also significant 2 or 3 percentage points, and that is probably related to the strength of the U.S. dollar and competition from other countries as well. Expansion in the U.S. on dairy farms may be limited because of the cost of money. Inflation, if you're going to have to borrow money at 7 or 8% interest, you might be a bit more slower increasing and expanding herds as far as that goes. Brazil and Argentina are really competitive, as we see, and it depends a little bit on rain. They do double cropping down there, and they've had good years. In fact, Brazil is #1 in soybeans compared to the United States in terms of total yield. So they are going to be competitive. And of course, some of our colleagues from China would rather buy soybeans probably from Brazil and Argentina than from the U.S. We also have, as Mike has pointed out, the Russian-Ukraine war continues to have problems in the whole world of grain supply. As milk prices are going to stay fairly stable. That's either good news or bad news, meaning that it came up a couple dollars per hundredweight here this summer, but it's not where it was in 2022, which would have been $5 per hundredweight different. That's a big difference as far as that goes. And an increase in ethanol production we'll talk about as well. Well, there are some really good news for dairy producers. First of all, we expect to see some strength in the fourth quarter. We're in the fourth quarter right now. And of course, we'll see that, especially when we look at the value of butter fat. Mike has already commented on point number 2. And then another one is that we're seeing heifer prices increasing anywhere from $200 to $400, depending on where you are. It appears the West Coast is a little bit more aggressive there. If you go out to Pennsylvania, they aren't seeing that big uptick as far as that goes. But certainly some farmers have extra heifers to sell, and now they're getting a little bit closer to break even. But the bad news, according to the University of Wisconsin, that's still not a profit center, raising heifers and selling them in the market as springing heifers. I want to say thanks. We're moving to our second phase here to Dairyland Labs. Certainly, Neil Winginger, we thank you very much for providing your data. And Dr. John Gieser from Rock River Labs will show that just to give you a feel of where we're at. So let's take a look. This is stuff that you can see from Dairyland Labs. You can see listed there as corn silage in 2023. And actually, if you look across, not a lot of big changes here. Now, remember, the drought corn, the good corn, the wet corn, it's all here. It's all mixed together. So that's why you test forages, because your forage may not show this, but nice numbers to look at. You can see that the adjusted NDF values down just a little bit, may reflect a bit shorter plant at this point. Starch is up just a little bit, so it really mirrors what Mike said a little bit about the growing of the corn itself. Take a look at that UNDF number. That's UNDF organic matter 240 hours. Write that down. Remember that becomes really critical when you and I build rations. You'll see here in just a minute as well. And of course, the ash content you can see is 3.7. Over there on the right side is brown midrib corn. That is your lower lignin corn. And again, you can see it is what it is. You can see that the NDF digestibility is basically about 6 units higher. That usually translates into more milk production and more dry matter intake. You can also see starch content is slightly down compared to the full season here. A little bit higher this year compared to last year or the other 3 years. So a little bit higher there, but typically that's you see what you see listed there as well. It also appears that maybe that's a little bit of a greener corn silage, a little bit wetter compared to the standard corn silage. The point is, these are your numbers. And notice, look at the UNDF, significant reduction in UNDF, and that's going to affect intake primarily in these. So my challenge is print these off and take a look at them and see how competitive are you compared to these numbers. This also comes from Dairyland Labs, roughly 23,000 plus samples. And again, you can see, as Mike pointed out, it's a good year. You can see not a lot of big shifts here in the program. The NDF digestibility down maybe just a tick as far as that goes, but otherwise not a major thing. But look, take a look at that UNDF, 17.1. Remember that compared to corn silage at 9.9 and BMR sitting down in the 7s. That will be important for you nutritionists and your dairymen at this stage of the game. Ash content about 10.7%. And we use RFQ, and I say if I'm going to put it in my dairy cows, it's got to be at least 150. So on average, this haylage should meet my criteria. This will be mixed haylage. That's defined obviously by the person sending it in. So this will be a legume and grasses here. Smaller numbers there at the top. And again, you can see a little bit less protein because that's not a legume at this stage of the game. Notice the UNDF is sitting at around 54 in this stage of the game. UNDF is slightly lower than the legume, and that if it's made right, you can get this number way on down. And we're seeing that in some of our cover crops, and maybe we can talk about that in the Q&A. The cover crops, I think, are here to stay as well. And now you can see my RFQ still at a fairly nice 159 number out in the program, up 2 points. I'm not sure that is statistically significant, but we'll leave it at that. Then also got our other database that came from Dr. John, and this will give you a little bit of a feel. You really want to print off the handout, because I'm only going to share the Midwest data with you here today, but John sent all the Western data and the Eastern data, and you can see which states are summarized there. So because of the sake of time, we are not going to run through all those numbers. And we just don't have time to do that, but it gives you a little idea of the timeline. He also puts it in basically one standard deviation up and from the average and to the high end there. Not quite a standard deviation, but a 15th percentile. That's the low end, and the 85 percentile is a good end, depending on how you want to flip-flap that around. And you can see where your states are. Lots of samples go into this summary as well. So you're going to see lots of lines here, and so we'll go through these and very quickly, because they are also at the back in the handout, and also John's comments are there. So you're going to get the Hutjens comment using his data, and then you'll see his data. a lot of good news here, Mike and Caitlin. And you can see if you look this year, a nice trend of lower NDF. So that means a little bit lower fiber in the feedstuffs here, and that's going to have impact in terms of fill factor as well. The term that comes out of Rock River is on the bottom chart, and you can see this is total track NDF digestibility, and not a big surprise. It moves a little bit to the left, to the right. That's the good news. So remember, the top one, you want to go left. You want to be a leftist. We won't get into politics on this, but we'll leave it at that. And down at the bottom, this is total track NDF digestibility, and therefore that NDF is a little more digestible, even though there's a little bit less of that. The next plot also is Midwest haylage. You can look at the ash content, and again, watch these curves. Notice, at least in my mind, you can see this curve is shifted to the left, which means we don't have as much dirt or contamination or clean. We have cleaner feed here. That could be due to not as much rain, Mike. It could be also how we handle that haylage, how we do merging, or how we lay it out there in the field. You may get some questions on that as well, but certainly that is a plus. We don't get a lot of energy from dirt, as we would say that. On the bottom is TDN, and again, it really reflects the total track NDF digestibility. And you can see, again, a nice move to the right again, meaning there's more energy in that alfalfa crop this year. And a TDN is the equation used to drive the NASEM model. When you start looking at digestible energy, metabolizable energy, net energy, that drives that, and that, of course, is a summative equation used by all our labs. We look at corn silage, and again, you can see not as much movement here. Look at the shape of your curves also. I meant to mention that even earlier. When you start seeing a flatter curve, it just means there's more variation in that crop. And so if I look at this one here, I guess I would interpret in 2023, there might be a little bit more variation in the Midwest corn silage crop. Mike, that may reflect some of the drought conditions, the pollination effects that may occur, the height of the plant, all those things come into play. Some of that late rain that did help some of the crops out on the corn side of the equation as well. So not only look at where is the average, but look at the shape of the curve. I think it's really powerful. This is some really neat data you can look at as well, along with the data that comes from Dairyland Labs. On the bottom is starch content. And again, you can see, if anything, there's just a slight tick down a little bit. If you look in the Midwest on this data set here. So you can see each of the data sets change slightly, but I think it drives home the point. You're going to test your forages, and you're probably going to do more testing this year because there could be more variation. But look at the starch curves. They are fairly similar in terms of the shape of the curves. We also look, there's a total track NDF. And the good news here, you can see this measurement here, it's gone a little bit more to the right, which means it should be a little bit more digestible in terms of getting energy for the rumen microbes to produce volatile fatty acids and microbial protein, or amino acids, if you wish, out there in the program. If you look at starch digestibility, you can see that it's all over the map, especially this year. So you may really want to stay on top. This is 7-hour starch digestibility, and you can see it's really all over. And so certainly that is going to make a difference. You may really want to be sure that if we can, and Mike talked about inventory, if we could wait 3 or 4 months for this year's corn crop, we call that Christmas corn silage, that would allow that starch hopefully to open up, to solubilize, take some of the prolamine protein away from the kernel and allow that starch to be utilized in the rumen. I like to see 70 of my starch being fermented in the rumen, because that is where I'm going to really drive VFA and amino acid production from my rumen microbes. This is another one to take a look at. This is kernel processing score. If you look at those colleagues out in the West Coast, they just smoke us here in the Midwest. You can see we are sitting right at 70. We don't see much movement there. And Dr. John points out the 70 is not considered excellent anymore. A 75, and some of the herds you can see are pushing 80. So that just simply means that starch is going to be a bit more available, excuse me, in the feeding program. So again, you can see we probably aren't getting as good a job kernel processing as some of our colleagues out west would be occurring. Here are some fun numbers to look at. We'll go through quickly. I thought I was going to hide it, but we'll just talk about it quickly. You really see the NDF digestibility numbers from the various data sets I showed to them. I like my legumes over 50% NDF digestibility. My grasses are sure 55. My cover crops would be in that same category if you're cutting them in the boot stage, and corn silage conventional 60%, BMR 65. So you can see that floating scale on these forages. They are not created equally at this point. And that really tells me what are the rumen microbes going to do with that fiber source in the digestive tract. The other one I think a lot of us nutritionists are excited about is the UNDF. And these numbers come from the Minor Institute out of Chazy, New York. And this is the total ration. Now remember, these legumes are sitting up in the high teens. The BMR corn size is around 7. So you can see the tremendous movement you're going to have in these numbers here. And that's why us colleagues in Illinois are really pushing a lot of corn silage to dismay of some of our alfalfa breeders in the Midwest as well. But it should be over 7% UNDF 240 in the total ration dry matter to maintain hopefully optimal or adequate rumen function or avoid acidosis. You'd like to be below 12% at a high end number here because that will be a fill factor. In other words, too much fiber in the ration in the cow slows down and it also limits dry matter intake. So rate of passage and fill factors become a factor. And of course, the labs can't calculate this, but they can give you the raw material that you and I can. So that'll be one of our messages in our talks this year in 2024 is what is your UNDF number? Just like what is your MUN number? Everybody should know what those numbers are, or your nutritionist should provide that to you. Okay, we're going to leave forages now, and it looks like we're about 3 minutes ahead of schedule, so I can talk slower or whatever the case is. Let's take a quick look at a grain cost and grain outlook. This is the latest information thanks to Mike Rankin because he had access to numbers I did not have on Friday. This is the November estimation on corn grain, up slightly. In fact, some of that acreage that Mike lost on forages, we've gotten here in the corn. We also stole some of that from our soybean colleagues as well. So we have just about 175 billion bushels. I mean, that's average yield. And in Illinois, big surprises because everybody thought we were going to be in trouble. And boy, these combines really spit out a lot of 200 bushel corn here in Illinois. So there's your total yield. There's your soybeans. You can see averaging right around 50 bushels per acre. Again, very common 60 in Illinois. And there's your yield as well. So there's going to be a lot of grain out there. So what's going to happen with that grain? I told you we'd show this to you. You can see last year, corn prices, $6.60 a bushel. This is, again, national USDA data. And soybeans at $14.20. You can see right now, those are the numbers we just had a bit earlier. So obviously, corn came down about $1.50 a bushel. Even a little bit stronger than that. Soybeans came down as well. And their projections, and that's just like the good news, Mike, I can blame this on somebody else. I don't have to speculate on what the crop might look like. They're suggesting even slightly lower prices here in 24-25, but they must be a lot smarter than I am. I also run for you. This is sesame. This is a November run from one of my colleagues. Sends this to me. She always sends this. And this is Midwest break-even prices. So as all of you know, this program now is free from The Ohio State University. They have a good football team. We'll see how good they are in 2 weeks when they play Michigan, but we'll leave that for another day. We'll let Mike speculate on that one. Anyway, you can see here are the current prices. This is what was in that computer program. And you can see the average price on hay, probably a bit low, Mike, but that's the number she used, but it gives you a feel for this one here. And then break even says, if you can buy this product, if that product is cheaper than that, then it's a really good buy. So it says corn grain at $1.71 a bushel is not a good buy. Now, I'm sorry, we're going to have to feed corn or barley or wheat or hominy or something like that to our cow. Look at this corn silage. Always a good buy here. And you can see this is $55 a ton. How do we get that price? Some people will use the thumb rule. A bushel of corn, if corn is $4.80 a bushel, multiplied by 10, that would make it $48 a ton. Dave Fisher several years ago ran these numbers for me, and corn silage and hay could be produced locally in the farm for just about half the price of what the marketplace is. We want market prices in here because for some farmers, it may tell them they'd be a lot smarter to sell their forages and become a crop farmer than milk cows 2 times or 3 times a day for exercise and not add any value to that forage crop. So you can see the winners here are corn silage, a heat-treated soybean meal, and actually 48% soybean meal. Usually you expect not a good buy, but you look at alternative protein prices, this one is good. Now remember, I'm cheating a little bit in the sense that I use not only Sesame's 4 breakdown prices, which would be net energy, lactation at 3x, metabolizable protein, they estimate, effective fiber, non-effective fiber. I also include lysine and methionine. So that's how that heat-treated soybean meal really rockets up there. You can see about $40 a ton to heat treated, and look at the value I add to that. And of course, that's going to be an excellent source of lysine for you guys and gals in countries that will not allow blood meal to be fed. We can here in the US. You're wanting to see the next one. Here comes the break-even prices on byproduct feeds. Distiller still a very good buy, just about a $40 ton buy advantage compared to break-even prices, even when soybean meal is pretty modest at this point, according to this one. Corn gluten feed, oh boy, we just don't get a lot of big breaks here. It gets scary and scary. It used to be a very good buy. Obviously, we're either exporting this or companies have this tied up. Soy hulls is kind of a push at this point, which surprises a lot of us in the Midwest because we had soy hulls coming off of these plants. Fuzzy cottonseed, that's the good news. It's a good price. It's a good price. That never hardly ever happens before. Right now, it's a good price. And remember, there is no oil in this one. So you start putting an oil value in, then it really looks good. Same thing with your roasted soybeans. And wheat mids, for some reason, is not just a good buy right now. So you can see fuzzy cottonseed, corn gluten distillers certainly are products to look at here in the Midwest. I also took that same one a month ago and looked at it. And of course, those are your Midwest prices listed here. In the Northeast, they're different. And unfortunately, you folks in the West, you get to pay for everything. You'll notice when you look at price differences here, really, really different. We already saw that in alfalfa. You can see it on cottonseed, distillers grains. A lot of that is transportation. I understand there. I guess jokingly we say we better move to Wisconsin, Illinois, because you can get that, or South Dakota, and get that cheaper feed. But be well aware of these regionality differences as well. All my numbers as shown in the last 2 slides were Midwest numbers. So what's going to happen here? Well, corn prices will depend on China. They buy a lot of corn. Fun thing is, a number came out, and that was that once you get under $6 a bushel, ethanol can become fairly profitable out here. And unfortunately, Brazil prices a month ago were 30 cents a bushel cheaper than the US. So we're in a world market, and guess where China and Japan and some of the other countries are going to go to buy corn? They're going to go to Brazil because they get a better buy. That thing also applies to butter, which is one of our problems right now as well. Soybean meal, as we mentioned earlier, we expect that to probably see lower. So I'm not sure you should be locking that price in right now because of the biodiesel is going to really lead to more crushing, and there are a number in Iowa, South Dakota, even Illinois, more crushing, soybean crushing plants are being built. They just think there's going to be a real opportunity as airlines start looking at this as a way to stay greener. And of course, the bad news is that, or good news, however you want to look at that, is a lot of these byproducts just follow the corn and soybean prices. They see if corn gets cheaper, some of these energy byproduct feeds are dropping in price, and vice versa. Quick question, Caitlin, we'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, we've got the poll question up for our attendees right now. You can go ahead and vote, and we'll talk about how much has your feed cost per cow changed from 2023 to 2024. Would you say up 50 cents per cow per day, down 50 cents per cow per day, no change, or not sure quite yet? We'll give everyone a few seconds to vote on it. So our response is up 50 cents per cow per day with 33% of respondents.
What was that percentage again, Caitlin?
33%.
Okay, 33% said it was going up, okay.
And then down 50 cents and not sure, both at 28%. And then 11% no change. So
wow.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. What really scares me, to tell you the truth, is the bottom one. If you don't know what your feed costs have changed in the last year, then shame on you. Shame on you, because 50 to 60% of your costs of producing milk is feed costs, and you should know where it's going, and you should be tracking that as far as that goes. The winner is down 50 cents, down 50 cents per day. And why is that? Well, all of you should have this little grid. Every dairy meeting in Illinois, we show this. And it says, well, where are you spending your feed dollars? And so I'm not going to walk you through this because you can print this out. But be careful because Mike Hutjens is very biased on this. On the forages, it's 2/3 corn silage, 1/3 legume cover crop grass on a dry matter base. So therefore, I'm cheating to my cheapest source of forages. Great energy is corn. Some of you folks in Canada, that'd be barley. Byproduct feeds, this is half fuzzy cottonseed, half corn gluten feed. Protein supplements is half soya or soybean meal and half distiller's grains. Then my minerals and vitamin pack, and then a small feed for balancing. And so you can see in my grid for Illinois, done last week, $7.28 for 49 pounds of dry matter, which then goes to 15 cents a pound of dry matter. And last year, that was 16 cents. And so there's your penny per pound of dry matter. So a lot of cows eat 50 pounds of dry matter. There's your answer for your polling question. And that would be about 50 cents. Of course, this is per cow. Now, these cows are producing 50 pounds of milk, then that's $1. If they're producing 100 pounds of milk, well, you can do the math as well. The bottom part is grid, equally important. And I think every one of you in line here today have to have those numbers. 15 cents per pound of dry matter. Feed costs per 100 weight of milk, $9.10. That's with 80 pounds of milk. Income or feed cost, just about $11 with the number we need to Illinois to cover all my costs. So Illinois farmers are not going to get filthy rich at $20 milk, and then feed efficiency 1.63. Take a look in the red numbers. Those herds that produce less milk all go the wrong way. So if you're going to tell me you're going to cut back on feed costs, when feed costs went down, even though the milk price is not at $25 a hundred, you are going to make a mistake. Here are the big five. And we're going to come back and talk each of those with one PowerPoint and wrap this thing up and see if there are any questions as we go on. This comes out of NASEM. So what is typically normal for corn silage? And you can see ash content, that's the normal value. So now you can see what is normal, depending on what and I put triticale on that because that's a very common cover crop here in Illinois along with wheat silage. Look at the standard deviation, and you can see that corn becomes a fairly clean crop because obviously we're harvesting above, a lot of you are harvesting 6-8 inches stalk in the field. Some of you are high chopping, leaving 18 inches in there. And so you can kind of see where it's going on. And look at triticale. It says you can have a lot of dirt, one standard deviation. Here is your mycotoxin guidelines. There could be a little more mycotoxin. Drought stress can increase, for example, aflatoxin, can also open up some of these other risks. This comes from Rock River Labs. Every lab can provide this to you. Your universities have it as well. And so just be eyes wide open. And what I do, we usually talk to these labs and say, what are you seeing coming in right now? Usually those are stress samples. Gives you, remember, these are total ration dry matters, not the corn, not the fuzzy cottonseed, but it's total ration dry matters. And watch this, some are parts per billion and some are parts per million. The decimal point is 30, so make sure you know what you got there. Same thing with nitrate toxicity and nitrate nitrogen. Some of you may be short, like the folks in Missouri, and if you're going to be short on forage, I know California forages are quite expensive, then you may say, well, I'm going to cheat down and feed less forages. This comes right out of the NASEM book and says if you're going to feed less forage NDF, then you're going to increase the total NDF, probably coming from byproduct feeds such as almond hulls or soybean hulls, and you're going to reduce the starch. So if you're going to start running short on forages, you're going to have to make some adjustments in those diets, and that's a really nice table coming out of NASEM. We know we really want to get cows to produce milk. And so I'm not going to cheat my cows, especially in early lactation, because that's where you and I are going to set the milk curve. We only get one chance to do that. We know high producing cows are most efficient, defining as milk per unit of dry matter. And then I'm Dutch. 1 pound of dry matter, remember we said it was 15 cents? The cows are supposed to produce 2 pounds of milk per pound of dry matter increase. I call that marginal dry matter increase. That means I got extra 40 cents from my milk. It cost me 15 cents, and even being Dutch, 25 cents a cow a day profitability. I'll take that to the bank all day. Building your milk check came out of a popular press magazine recently. Butterfat test. If you go up to 4.09, that's another $1.40, 100 you can add there. Milk protein can add you another 55 cents. A methane digester can add 40 cents per hundredweight. Dairy on beef, with 2/3 of the cows being bred to beef bulls at 75 cents a hundredweight. And a lot of you have a risk management program in effect as far as that goes. And of course, the DMC program has been paying off now for a number of months in a row. There's your value of milk fat. This is the October numbers. That's the most current ones we have. And you can see milk fat just skyrocketed up to 371. When the fat goes up, protein's got to go down and really take a dip. I would argue with those of you online, I'm going to keep producing milk protein because the world will want milk protein in the future. Other solids went up slightly as well. Here are your feed efficiency numbers. Notice they are both pounds and kilos from my colleagues are from the international level. This is from Ohio State. I love this table. And why do I like that? Because it tells me what's the relationship. And so if you've got cows that are averaging 70 pounds of milk with a feed efficiency 1.25, shame on you. Something's wrong out there on your farm. It could be days open, it could be somatic salt count, it could be forage quality. And is there dollars? You better believe it. I love this little slide. It simply shows that if I go, and most of my farms in Illinois will be in that overall herd, 1.4 to 1.5. If you as nutritionists or as a dairy farmer can move that up to 1.5, that means I'm going to be feeding about 3.5 pounds less dry matter, and that saves me 51 cents a cow a day. That is huge. If you go to a dairy meeting and the speaker can save you a quarter per cow, he or she has done you a real service. Here are the latest ones on Penn State separator box guidelines. Again, this is coming from the Rick Grant's group out at Minor. And you can see if anything is happening here, a lot less feed in the top box and a lot more feed in the second box. And that's where we want to be taking a look at. To me, those two boxes should add up to over 55% in the feeding program. And corn silages, I've seen our best corn silages will be over 60% in the second box. And of course, you can't do anything about this now. It's November. But the table also was printed by the group out at Minor, and you can see that if you've got high quality forages, you can chop it longer, theoretical length of chop. If it's low quality forages, you're going to chop it shorter. We got to get it moving out of the digestive tract to make room for the next 52, 54 pounds of dry matter per day. So our take-home messages are listed. Forage quality and quantity are going to be key. Monitor your quality. Even though we show you all these benchmarks, they don't, what's happening on your farm. Be well aware of regional differences here and use all the tools. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Caitlin to see if we have any questions.
Yes, we have time for a few questions here that we will get to in just a second. As a reminder to our audience, as we get into those, you will be able to watch a recording of this presentation on our Hordes Dairyman YouTube channel, as well as hordes.com/webinars here shortly. That's where our archives are. This has our upcoming webinars as well, and we hope our attendees will make plans to join us here. Our next webinar will be on Monday, December 11th, same time. The title of that presentation is Detecting Estrus in Today's Dairy Cows, and that'll be with Dr. Ronaldo Seri from the University of British Columbia. And then in January, we will kick off the new year with a dairy situation and outlook for 2024 with Leonard Polzin from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. But before we get into those, we do have to wrap up today's discussion with a few questions. And we had one come in early that I think both Mike Rankin and Mike Hutjens can touch on as well. And that is based on forecasted forage quality, like both of you talked about. Should TMRs be significantly different from a winter ago?
Well, I think something like that is really hard to make a blanket statement on because as we've tried to impart over this last hour, there's a lot of variation out there. So what might be right for one may not be right for another, just depending upon what your growing conditions were. I guess I'd like to know whether specifically the question refers to a specific component, but I just think it's hard to answer specifically, not knowing the situation.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that if you are on my average lines, if your feed really fits the average line from last year to this year, then the answer is probably very little change, very little change. But as Mike pointed out, boy, look at the shape of those curves. I mean, some of you are going to be way on the outside variation, and of course, then changes will have to be made. And I think Mike Rankin is a politician because he just doesn't answer the question. He just goes round and round. But that's okay, Mike. Better luck on the next question.
Thank you both. Yeah, fair answer there as well. This next question, maybe both of you can talk to. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Hutjens, but have you seen many molds or toxins in 2023 corn silage?
Well, my reaction is I'm not hearing a lot coming in out of the field at this point. Some companies are a little more aggressive and they do much more sampling for it, so it's out there. But certainly, if we didn't have a wet fall, a cold wet fall, and that takes out some of the what I call the cold mycotoxins, the DONs, the T2s, and products like that. Drought stress has always got aflatoxin written all over it as far as the risk goes. So I've not heard a lot. Mike, what have you heard?
I have not heard a lot either. I would be surprised unless you were dry pretty much all summer that even aflatoxin should be a big issue.
Awesome, thank you both. Dr. Hutjens, you talked about ash content, and so we don't, that was a great quote you had, we don't get any energy from dirt. Can both of you talk a little bit about what is our best practices to make and then feed a ration that is quote unquote clean, as you're talking about?
Well, I'll start because really this is going to be Mike's wheelhouse at this point. One of the concerns I have with dirt and that it can inoculate my silages. And so we've seen that in some of our forage bags here at the university. You'll see these round moles that'll pop up right in the face, right in the pet part of the bag itself. And we suspect that is going to cause, was inoculated with some dirt contamination that's occurring there as well, or from some source. So certainly the risk of storage from that aspect. Why do we see these balls? Mike, my guess was that it kept growing until we had enough acid there to stop the mold growth from occurring as far as that goes. What's the bad news? Well, if you've got some wild yeast in that there, then when the wild yeast metabolizes some of that lactic acid, then it will end up resulting in mold being released as far as that goes. Mike, what can you do in the field to reduce any dirt contamination?
Well, a lot of that contamination comes with the manipulation of the feed after it's cut, and sometimes during cutting. I guess the biggest thing is leave enough stubble out there. 3 inches for alfalfa. You don't need to go down to 1 inch. And then as you either rake and or merge, make sure that that equipment is set up properly such that you're not digging into the soil. We do tend in drier years, you're gonna kick up more dust and dirt than you will in a wetter year. But still, if you're paying attention, you should be able to keep ash levels at a pretty decent level. I guess I'd also suggest, you can get dirt in this feed during filling and feed out as well. Mud on tractor tires, all these kinds of things can be a problem. So if you're in a situation where you don't have a good pad for storage and or not enough room to manipulate without getting out in the mud, that can be a problem as well.
There's a significant amount of ash there, then obviously it's going to change the composition of the TMR or the feeding program, because as you already pointed out, that there is no nutrients in the dirt. So if we got an extra 2 or 3% dirt in there, that is going to take room in the feeding program.
Thank you. Dr. Hutjens, we have a question for you. Someone says, what value do you see in analyzing forages for amino acids?
Well, I'll probably get in big trouble here, but I don't see a lot of value in it because those forages are going to go through the rumen. And guess what the rumen is going to do to about 2/3 of it? And in some cases, 3/4 of it is going to take and deaminate it and break it on down to ammonia, and the microbes then are going to reform it. So I think the microbes in the rumen can really drive my amino acid profile more than what feeds are going to be, unless of course they are heat treated, such as roasted soybean, roasted canola meal, or something like that. So I don't think it's a big value. I can imagine some companies are going to open up on me on this one, but that's my honest response.
Sure. We will wrap up with one more question here, and maybe just a top takeaway from each of you. What options do dairy producers have if they're preparing for low forage inventories this winter?
Low forage inventories, well, you know, I guess I wonder in most cases whether that's going to be a huge problem, other than maybe in localized areas. Of course, you can purchase in feed, which has always been an option, but otherwise you've just got to go to some other fiber sources. I'll let Mike talk about which ones are best. I know soy hulls, wheat mids, a little more expensive now, but I don't know what do you see for best substitutes there from a fiber perspective?
Mike, I think it's your answers are excellent. 2 points I would add to that. Number one, let's figure it out today. So in other words, let's not wait till March or April or May and discover corn silage is going to be gone in June, because I mean to have some of that corn silage to stabilize my diet. So figure out where we are today, and there are some great tables, some drones you can actually use to estimate inventory on farm. You just need to know now. If you're going to be short, Mike, you're right on the money. You're going to look at probably some either local sourced feed ingredient. Maybe you could buy corn silage from somebody. I don't know if that's feasible or not. You're not going to transport that very far, but be well aware most of mine, except for fuzzy cottonseed, is not going to have much functional fiber. So I'm going to have chemical fiber coming from my soy pellets or from my corn gluten pellets, but I will not have much effective fiber. So just be careful that we have enough of that UNDF/lignin in the feeding program.
Perfect. Thank you both, and thank you for collecting your data and sharing with it here today. I also want to thank Kuhn for their sponsorship of this webinar as we wrap up. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. A reminder that you can rewatch this later if you want to come back for some more information. We hope you enjoyed everything shared today. Thank you again to our speakers, and we hope to see everyone next time. Have a great rest of your day.